The Boldly Now Show. Burning desire. Big ideas. Bold action.
So welcome to another Boldly Now segment. I have Rachel Morrison with myself, Michael Sean Conaway, and I have the great honor and fortune to have Atossa Soltani, Director and President of the Board of Amazon Watch, with us today for a conversation. Atossa has been helping to protect and to guide the headwaters of the Amazon and the indigenous people there for most of her career. And we're really excited to have your wisdom shared with us today. Want to start off with how is it there for you? You know, check in with you. Obviously many of us have been impacted in great ways. How are things for you right now in Santa Monica, and how are things for the Amazon?
Thank you, Michael Sean. It's an honor to be here, and Rachel, it's great to be with you guys. So I'm doing well. I'm in Santa Monica. I've been in isolation since late February, and basically it's a time of a very busy time, actually, of making the most of this moment for advancing the work we're doing to transition to an ecological world. And so, I've been on many Zoom calls every day. The situation in the Amazon is really precarious. We were already in a state of emergency in the Amazon with the deforestation crisis that's been looming since Bolsonaro took office. It's been underway since Bolsonaro took office last year. So we've been already bracing for record year of deforestation and forest fires. And then on top of that, we now have a COVID emergency. And it's been very, there's over nearly 30,000 cases of COVID right now in Amazon basin. And that includes, very little testing actually going on. So that figure could be many times greater. And there's been many deaths already. It's hard to track them between the cities and the indigenous villages, but it is definitely really concerning. And we've been mobilizing and responding and holding space for really what wants to come through right now, both in terms of our movements, gaining strength and clarity, and also for our ability to actually speak in solidarity and support to the people who are very vulnerable. Indigenous peoples are, they already, went through a mass epidemic, a epidemic situation when the Spaniards first arrived and the colonizers first arrived. So here they are 500 years later going through that, huge second wave. And, it's very much when the colonizers arrived in the 1500s, there were probably somewhere between 10 and 20 million indigenous people living in Central and South America. So it was already a massive genocide by the time a few hundred years passed. And so for them, this is like a traumatic memory, but we're all living that now. And indigenous peoples are in some ways vulnerable because there's not many health posts near their territories. There's not much in terms of information that's in their languages. So while we take for granted, there's all this campaigns about washing your hands and wearing masks and what to do, what not to do. In the indigenous remote areas, there's very little communication and hardly any messages getting out there in their own languages. So that's been a doubly difficult situation. At the same time, indigenous peoples are saying that this is a prophecy. This is part of what was foretold this time would come, and that it's a time for great reflection. It's a time to go within and purify. It's a time to take, really clarify who we are as a species and what we want for our future and what we want for future generations. So it's been interesting being part of a lot of these conversations recently.
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of the questions I've been asking for people and trying to grapple with a little bit is this, okay, so normal before this whole thing started was not great for most people. And maybe they talk about the 1%, but it's probably 1/10 of 1% that it's been great for. Even the wealthy, people from the United States or Europe, wealthy meaning relatively wealthy to the rest of the world, have all been in a state of struggle as well, a different kind of struggle, but nobody's nobody's quote unquote had it made, right? And we've just been pretending like it's that way. And now we're all out of this, and we see, oh wow, it's kind of this culture that we built that's perpetrating, violence on the whole world, indigenous peoples, poor people, especially poor people, the lower 2 to 3 billion. Like, how can we participate in this when it's not even good for us? And so a lot of the questions for us, honestly, soul searching is, and today is about this with this festival, like, well, what kind of world do we want to build? Considering how fragile and broken this one is, what kind of world do we want to build? That's us for us. And I think you can reflect on that for us a little bit for yourself personally, but, do the indigenous people have a different view on that than us? You said they had it as a prophecy. They have any idea themselves what is on the other side of that prophecy would be something I would be really curious about.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we are all in this isolation. We're all working on our personal survival. We're worried about whether or not, our loved ones, especially parents, elders, will make it. We're definitely in this existential question, living that question. But, what we've shown as a global community is that we've shown we can turn on a dime. We can shut down, power down, go inwards, isolate, make huge changes globally in the space of no time at all, when our leaders basically help us get clear about our priorities being life, being surviving. And, in looking at everyone's looking at those curves, like how do we flatten the curve for COVID-19 globally? Well, we need to simultaneously be flattening the curve for greenhouse gas emissions and species extinction and our economic, inequality and injustice. We need to be basically doing simultaneously those kinds of things. And, but, I do think that the current crisis is showing us that we can change. We can make far-reaching change. When we put life before money, or life before our economic well-being, that we're putting the entire idea of our community and collective well-being as our priority. And the planet needs for us to do that now. So I think this idea of survival of the individual, to the survival of our communities, to the survival and well-being and health of the planet, planetary health, biosphere health, ecosystem health, my bioregion health, all of that is there for us to notice, is there for us to see with new eyes. And I do think that, it's a space of basically saying, how can we not waste this moment, not waste this crisis, use it as an opportunity to usher in a world that's focusing on the things we really care about, which is health and well-being, happiness, and from that place be seeking also economic security and financial security. Now, the thing I will say, you mentioned the inequality, that it's the thing that I certainly feel like is the untold story that needs to get into the people's consciousness. I mean, people generally know that there's inequality in the world. But if you just look at some of the statistics, the fact is that 93 cents out of every dollar that the global economy grows goes to that 0.1% of the population that already controls more wealth than half of the world's poorest people. And that's hard to wrap our head around. What's happening is that our economic system, which is life blind, it destroys life to make money. That system is not also it's also basically doing a disservice for future generations and also current generations. It's creating inequality, that's creating more poverty. And the fact is that if we can think about, the fact that the economic system right now is creating a situation where the more money you have, the more power you have, and the more money you receive in the future. And basically that inequality is creating such a super high concentration of wealth in the hands of a few companies and a few pools of funds, that's basically undermining our democracy. It's undermining our life support system of the planet, and it's undermining ultimately our ability to have a collective democracy that works for all. And so we do, it's a time to notice that. It's a time to really say, well, how would we live? How would we live if we, we could basically take away the struggle for survival, which is at the kind of the operating system of most of the world, not just the world's poor, but most of the world is in this mindset of, or in competitive struggle for survival. If we remove that and said, basically we have the means and the will to live seek happiness and well-being, and I think people would respond to that. I mean, that's why I think some of the conversations about universal basic income is taking off so much right now. Even the Pope has called for it, and there are countries that are looking at testing how this could work. Spain has made a commitment to move to a permanent universal basic income, to basically say if your basic needs were met and you could focus on the things that matter: happiness, health, well-being, service to the whole, service to life, service to community, to mental health, physical health, and ecosystem health. What would you do with your life if all of your basic, needs were met? And I think we're just, we're in that space right now, in that liminal space where the old stuff is like really not working, and we're in, we're on timeout right now, and the new stuff is starting to appear on the horizon. We kind of see where we need to go. We just don't know how to get there. And I think part of our challenge now is to really inspire the masses to help birth the world that we know is possible, that our hearts know is possible.
That's beautiful. When I hear you say that, I think, if I had a magic wand for you, Atossa, and we could call it a prayer, we could call it a declaration, but if we knew that our words in this moment would speak reality into existence, what is it that you would share? What is it that you would say that would bring that most precious world that we all see into existence with a level of ease that's available to us?
I mean, whether it's a prayer or it's a paradigm, it's probably both. One thing that I always think about is the indigenous wisdom that has been shared with me in many circles around the fire, in the jungle, in circles here in North America with indigenous people. They always say, really, we are borrowing this earth from future generations, and that our aspiration as human beings needs to be being good ancestors to future generations. That just speaks so loudly to me in terms of what is our cultural value around who we are. We're in this world right now where the cultural paradigm is about being successful or being rich, having followers, or being famous. Those kinds of things are the cultural paradigm of success for our generations. And I think about, indigenous wisdom says, your success story is about being a good ancestor to 7, 10 generations into the future. So I think about that, and when my meditation, sometimes I basically say, okay, I'm listening to the future generations. What are you telling me? And also, this whole idea, I love the work of Joanna Macy and the work of deep ecology and the work that reconnects, really calling on us to listen from that place of what wants to be born right now, listening to the earth, listening to future generations, what wants to come through right now, and how do we serve that which is, wanting to come through right now. And it's a question. And, I think the other thing that I would say to you is that sometimes just sitting on the beach or sitting on a mountainside or in nature, in the forest, listening, what ends up happening for me is that I end up seeing the genius in nature, the patterns in the forest, the way the genius, the patterns of life in the forest. And I think that, obviously biomimicry and permaculture are ways that they're thought patterns that are reflecting on the wisdom of nature, saying, how can we take that wisdom from nature and incorporate it into the way we live our lives? And I always think, gosh, nature has the most incredible palettes. It's the most amazing artist. It's the most beautiful designer. It's incredible engineer, architect. It's it's got this, the work of Biomimicry Institute to promote nature-based design, nature-based solutions. And I think, gosh, if we could just relax and saying like, we don't have to figure everything out in our heads. We just have to take in, receive the wisdom that is all around us. How can we adopt the principles of living systems into the way we organize our economies, our food systems, our energy systems, our, basically interdependent, interwoven human systems. And so, so I reflect on that a lot. I reflect on, the great work that's already been done by folks that are looking at systems thinking, regenerative economies, regenerative finance, and really saying, okay, the first thing we need to do is sort of have mindfulness, like look at the state of the planet and see how we are living collectively, and then look to nature for the answers. And then how do we organize politically to, of course we have to organize politically, but here's what I would say, we have to organize in communities. Like as I said, nature self-organizes. No central authorities telling trees to do this or that. Nature self-organizes. We are nature. When we look at, the statistics that only half of the cells in our body are human cells, the other half are other beings, like microbiome, and that we are an ecosystem, that we, from a very cellular level all the way to the biosphere, are these patterns of living systems. So how do we get aligned with that? How do we get aligned with life? And so we were asking this question at a conference call I was in with these amazing thought leaders going, okay, just how do we align our lives with life? And I was thinking about this, and I was like, it's like also this word we use the word saying making a living. We say making a living, this is idea that we're making a living. So how do we bring making a living about life honoring, perpetuating conditions for life to continue? How do we do that? And I think if people were given a choice, I mean, a lot of people already do, people who are farming, who are helping heal, who are healers, who are nurses, who are doctors, who are doing all kinds of modalities of healing, are already in this economy of the caring and sharing economy, the gift economy. If your basic needs were met, what would you do? How would you serve the organism? And most people's fears are about struggle for survival, struggle for food and shelter and water and safety and personal safety. And all of those things are holding us back. And we are in a place where we have the means, we have the wealth in the world to address every need of every human being on this planet, and allow them to pursue this idea of, what nature does, flourishing, which is like evolving, co-evolving, qualitatively evolving as opposed to quantitatively evolving, which is what we're doing now. And it's going on and on. I'm so excited.
Yeah, no. I want to just reflect a couple of things I heard. You said something about human flourishing, and I think that was really great. And just especially looking at indigenous people and the fact that they actually have models that produce flourishing. Well, most of us and most of our cultures worldwide, we actually don't even know what that means. We need like a basic course on what it looks like to flourish. And then the other thing you said, there's two pieces. One, around seeing nature, like looking out and seeing the genius in nature. And I love that you said that, biomimicry and these abilities to see beyond ourselves, like see beyond my body and my home and my family, actually to go out into nature and see. And I think that's a brilliant suggestion, that we expand our consciousness by literally expanding what we see, what we're witness to. And then the second thing you said that really resonated strongly with me and kind of our generative futurist look is that we need to listen to the voices of our descendants, 7, 10, 20, 30, 100, 1,000, 10,000 years in the future. We need to listen for their voices speaking back to us. What's their request for us as ancestors? What is it they are asking us to leave them? And that's another expanding consciousness move. You're not just seeing more and witnessing more, you're actually being present to those future generations and those past generations. And when you speak that way, it just rings true. And it rings as a practice that, everybody listening today, go outside, see if you can see more. Go inside and see if you can hear more. See if you can hear that call of those future generations. And I think between those two pieces of guidance, a lot becomes very much more clear. A lot of times we talk about, do we need to turn to the indigenous peoples to learn those things? Well, but we have the planet Earth, we have Mother Earth here, and we have all of time that we can meditate and commune with ourselves. And so I think a little bit of what you're saying is, hey, we have to generate that for ourselves and that relationship for ourselves. So I really appreciate that. I want to ask one last question. What is going on for you in Amazon Watch? I know, these economic times and certain period cause a lot of stress, especially if you're trying to, your task of protecting the headwaters is Herculean. It's a huge task. Is there anything that we can do as an audience to support you in the Amazon right now?
Yeah, that would be awesome to get more support. Several things. One is the Sacred Headwaters Initiative is a coalition, includes Amazon Watch, Pachamama Alliance, 25 indigenous nations in Ecuador and Peru. We're working to protect an area the size of Oregon and the headwaters of the Amazon. We're working to transition to an economic future that's based on life flourishing. And we're doing all kinds of strategies, whether it's trying to demand debt forgiveness for the country, to providing support for implementation of indigenous people's life plans, which are their holistic view for their territories, and also fighting the destructive mining, demanding that the oil be kept in the ground. We have a declaration on sacredheadwaters.org that spells out this, the vision for the Sacred Headwaters and the work the indigenous peoples are doing there and we're supporting. And we invite people to sign that declaration and be in solidarity with that movement for the future of the headwaters, which is the most biodiverse part of the Amazon basin. And then the other thing we're inviting people to do is learn about how, whether it's consumption of beef or the financial institutions they're banking out, or whether it's, what products that are coming from the Amazon that could be boycotted, and not just your own personal consumption, but help us put pressure on the big buyers like Costco and companies that are by JP Morgan Chase or BlackRock who are financing the destruction. So help us be a movement, help us support the indigenous peoples. And then the last thing I would say is that right now we're trying to keep the forest guardians alive. People who are into plant medicine or understand the properties of medicinal plants from the Amazon, which is actually a quarter of all from modern pharmaceuticals come from the rainforest. We need to keep alive indigenous peoples, and they're facing COVID. So we've launched a COVID emergency fund to bring resources. We're trying to raise basically within the next 2 months, $5 million for immediate, urgent, keep alive indigenous peoples and their organizations, everything from test kits to prevention, to medical evacuation, to food systems and resilience so they're less dependent on the outside world. Help us get that going. That's an effort with about 25, 30 environmental and human rights organizations, plus the indigenous peoples themselves decide where the money goes, and 100% goes to the front lines. So AmazonEmergencyFund.org is another way. And really, I say become that person who, more than anything you can do is do those things, and then also become that person who's part of the forest movement, part of the movement for guardians of life for this planet. Become that person who is basically sees themselves as cells in the body of a living organism, and from that place work, whether it's to support the Amazon or your own watershed, your own river basin, to basically become become basically the immune system of Gaia. And from that place, we can do a lot.
Well, on behalf of all of life, Atossa, thank you for the courageous, intelligent, and deeply compassionate work that you're bringing into the world. We are with you in solidarity and support you and all of your endeavors going forward. Thank you for sharing your time with us today.
So much, you guys. Really, it's been an honor.
The Boldly Now Show, igniting the world of burning desire, big ideas, and bold action.